We are starting the day off with a very important topic, what's going on at the major energy agencies and how they're coordinating around energy storage. So I'm going to go ahead and invite our panelists to come up on stage. This panel will be moderated by Brian Orion from Lawyers for Clean Energy, who's going to introduce the speakers to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to be on the stage here today, and I want to introduce our panel. This is panel one, and the topic of the panel is Interagency Coordination on Energy Storage Policy. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Brian Orion. I'm an attorney with an energy law practice in San Francisco called Lawyers for Clean Energy, and I'll be your moderator today. And just to set up the topic as we envisioned it, the inspiration was really that energy storage and the electricity system in general is increasingly a place of policy innovation and greater complexity, especially as we look to what are really some fairly profound changes with integration of renewable energy, integration of increasing distributed generation, and a lot of other policies that are taking root now, which are really driving a lot of fairly significant change. And that is really nowhere more true than in storage, insofar as storage really touches so many different areas of the grid. It's such a flexible resource, so many potential uses and applications, that it really implicates and touches on a lot of different jurisdiction and a lot of different agency action and policy making. So given that this is an energy storage conference, we thought it would be most appropriate to bring together leaders from a number of those agencies so that they could educate us as an audience about what's going on, because gosh knows it's hard to keep track of what's happening on a day-to-day basis because it changes so frequently. And also to share information, so to kind of allow everyone to be together to kind of share best practices and learn from each other. And in part, I think just symbolically to demonstrate that this is a shared endeavor with shared purpose, and that hopefully we are all in this together working for a common goal, which is to improve our grid and through the deployment of energy storage. So with that, we're honored to have such a distinguished panel. I think it's interesting, all three of the speakers could probably have led the marquee and keynote this conference today, so it's really a privilege to have them all together here on stage. I'm going to start with an introduction, and then we'll jump into a question type discussion, and we'll leave time at the end for questions, so if things come to mind, we'll have time for those questions at the end. So on my immediate left is Chairman Jon Wellinghoff. Jon Wellinghoff was named Chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, by President Obama on March 19, 2009. First appointed as a commissioner to FERC in 2006, Chairman Wellinghoff is an energy law attorney with 37 years experience in regulatory, consumer, and commercial law. Before joining FERC, he was in private practice focusing primarily on renewable energy, distributed resources, and energy policy. He served 2 terms as the state of Nevada's first consumer advocate for customers of public utilities, and authored the first comprehensive state utility integrated planning statute. He also was the primary author of the Nevada Renewable Portfolio Standard Act. Chairman Wellinghoff's priorities at FERC include instituting policies and practices to create more robust and efficient wholesale electric markets by enabling renewable resources and distributed resources such as demand response, energy efficiency, and, as relevant today, local storage systems to fully participate in those markets. He holds a Juris Doctorate from Antioch School of Law, a Master's of Arts in Teaching from Howard University, and a BS in Mathematics from the University of Nevada, Reno. And next to stage left, I guess your right, is Karen Edson. A 30-year veteran of public affairs and policy, Karen Edson is the Vice President, Policy and Client Services for the California Independent System Operator Corporation, California ISO. She joined the organization in 2005 and has responsibility for the areas of customer service and industry affairs, government regulatory affairs, communications, and policy development. Prior to joining the ISO, Ms. Edson served in a number of senior roles within state government, including Commissioner on the California Energy Commission and Assistant Director of the California Research Bureau. From 1985 to 2000, she headed a small consulting firm that specialized in energy policy development and power plant permitting, with clients that included major geothermal and other non-utility power plant developers. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Berkeley. And finally, Carla Peterman. Carla Peterman is a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission. She was appointed by Governor Brown in December of last year. She came to the CPUC from her role as a commissioner at the California Energy Commission, where she served from 2011 to 2012. Commissioner Peterman has conducted research at the University of California Energy Institute at Haas since 2006 and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory from 2008 to 2010. She was an environmental business analyst with a community development nonprofit from 2004 to 2005 and was an associate focused on energy financing in the investment banking division of Lehman Brothers from 2002 to 2004. Commissioner Peterman also served on the board of directors for the Utility Reform Network from 2008 to 2011. Commissioner Peterman will complete her doctoral studies this year, is that correct?
That is correct, hopefully.
in energy and resources at the University of California, Berkeley. Commissioner Peterman holds a BA in history from Howard University and an MS in environmental change and management and MBA from Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. With that introduction, I want to start out with the discussion. And to approach this topic and provide some background that will hopefully be useful to frame up the entirety of today's events, I want to ask an overview question to start. This has two parts. The first is, in high-level terms, I'd like to ask the speakers to describe the scope of your agency's authority as it touches energy storage. And secondly, to provide us with an update on the status of efforts underway at each of your agencies to implement energy storage within your particular role in the process.
Get to go first, Brian?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and go down the line. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Well, for those of you who don't know about FERC much, let me give you a quick background, and then we'll go into the storage context. But FERC's work in regulating the wholesale electric markets revolves around ensuring that those markets are efficient, fair, and competitive. For the past several decades, FERC has emphasized a market-based approach to regulating power trades. If a seller can demonstrate that it does not have market power, FERC generally allows willing buyers and sellers to strike their own deals. And while transmission remains a regulated monopoly, the majority of electric consumers in FERC-regulated states are served by RTOs and ISOs, where the transmission provider and the market operator are the same entity, independent from market participants. In non-RTO states where power is traded in bilateral markets, FERC's focus has largely been on ensuring open access to transmission grid to ensure that resources can be delivered into the market. Now, FERC's approach on all technologies that can provide market services is generally the same, and that is there something in FERC's rules that is acting as a barrier to the market selecting the most economic resource? We're not an agency that funds technologies. We also don't regulate the procurement decisions by utilities. We regulate the terms and conditions of wholesale power sales and the transmission of electricity in interstate commerce. We leave it to the buyers and sellers to determine whether to provide or take service from storage facilities. We work to ensure that all resources are given a reasonable opportunity to participate in the wholesale markets, a market in which a variety of resources compete against each other to meet the supply needs of consumers. This means we tend to focus on the nuts and bolts of market operations. So with that said, we have given thought in recent years as to how storage can or might participate in wholesale electric markets. So back in 2010, FERC requested comments on how the wholesale markets may be creating barriers to energy storage. And we asked a number of questions. Among those were, when can a storage provider be classified and receive compensation as a transmission asset? Should a storage project be permitted to receive compensation as transmission and also receive compensation for enhancing the value of generation or providing ancillary services? Do FERC's pricing policies for ancillary services create undue barriers to energy storage? Would a standalone contract storage service make sense, similar to the way that natural gas storage is marketed? Does FERC need to update its accounting and reporting requirements to facilitate cost of service rate making for new storage technologies? These questions all relate to the ultimate question, that is, what is the business case for electric storage in wholesale energy markets? How can FERC structure market rules to enable this multi-dimensional technology and provide storage developers with distributed opportunities for their storage assets? In essence, how to stack revenues from storage applications. In part, those questions arise because of the underlying structure of the wholesale electric markets. As you all know, storage facilities can function in a number of ways, provide nearly instantaneous balancing service, arbitrage energy prices across different time periods, smooth output from the variable generation such as wind and solar, defer the need for transmission or distribution upgrades, and the list goes on. In fact, in 2010, Sandia Labs did a study that identified 17 distinct applications for storage devices. In vertically integrated utility, the utility can capture various value streams associated with each of these applications. Deferred transmission costs can be realized at the same time utility uses the storage facility to maximize the value of its generation fleet and balance the moment-to-moment fluctuations of the grid. But in wholesale markets, these functions become associated with discrete products and services, energy capacity, a particular ancillary service or transmission. This unbundling of products in the wholesale markets can be a challenge for storage developers needing access to all potential revenue streams in order to be economic. In response to our request for comments and an outreach to the industry, companies have raised the issue of the fragmented revenue streams, but it seems no real solutions have yet emerged. Instead, we've got more concrete suggestions regarding our pricing policies, market rules, and accounting regulations. So to date, FERC is focused on these topics, seeking to implement reforms that level the playing field within the market as they exist. And one of the most significant actions that FERC has taken was to require RTOs and ISOs to pay for frequency regulation service based upon the speed and accuracy of the resource being used, our Order 755. Regulation service is that moment-by-moment balancing of the system. RTOs and ISOs require regulation service through competitive bidding mechanisms. As newer technologies started to provide regulation service, the RTOs and ISO markets, in those markets, it became clear that fast-responding resources like storage were often being asked to address a disproportionate share of the regulation needs. So FERC changed the way that RTOs and ISOs pay for regulation service, tying compensation to accuracy and speed, allowing resources that are most effective at following frequency deviation signals to provide that service and freeing up other slower resources for other services. Most of the RTOs have implemented these pricing changes, although some continue to work on market rules or software necessary to comply with FERC's regulation. And in those markets that have implemented this change, we're seeing increased numbers of storage facilities being deployed. Outside of the RTO markets, regulation service is provided by transmission providers, many of which are vertically integrated utilities. Pricing is generally based on the embedded price of the slice of system resources used to provide regulation service. Under FERC transmission policies, regulation service can be purchased from a transmission provider or it can be self-supplied. However, there isn't a lot of clarity regarding how a customer might self-supply regulation service from, for example, a battery. FERC also proposed to increase transparency in regulation service pricing to make it easier for customers to self-supply from alternative resources such as batteries. Taking the principles of Order 755, and applying them in bilateral market context, transmission providers would be required to show how they determine regulation service requirements, taking into account speed and accuracy of the resource being used. On a related issue, FERC is also exploring changes to its pricing policy for ancillary services sold to a transmission provider. Outside of the RTO markets, transmission providers are the dominant buyers of capacity used to provide ancillary services such as regulation and imbalance service. However, FERC has placed limitations on the sale to transmission providers to mitigate concerns of potential market power. FERC's concerns have been that the seller with market power may be able to charge excessive rates to end up getting passed on by the transmission provider to its captive customers. We have a pending rulemaking where we're exploring alternative rate-making policies to limit the potential for market power while enhancing the ability to make sales to transmission providers. So we continue to work through the details, but hopefully we can have something productive in this area shortly. Some storage developers have sought clarity from FERC regarding the potential to cover costs of a storage facility in transmission rates. FERC has addressed this question in several orders, most recently in 2010 in an order involving Western Grid, a developer proposing to use a storage device to address voltage issues and line overloads within the California ISO. FERC agreed that a storage facility in that order could qualify as a transmission facility eligible for a transmission rate treatment if the project were selected by the ISO as an appropriate solution and if the project were operated as a transmission asset. But that later qualification, operation as a transmission asset, can be problematic for some storage developers. Returning to the issue of fragmented revenue streams, it may be most efficient to use a storage facility for a range of applications, not limited to a transmission function. Yet the way FERC's rate policies are set up, it's difficult to operate in both the cost-based transmission environment and the market-based energy environment. Similarly, FERC has focused in recent years on working on transmission planning reforms which have been announced in our orders 890 and 1000. In those orders, FERC has required a comparable consideration of non-transmission alternatives in the regional planning process. But again, there is no rate mechanism other than the transmission rate base for the costs of non-transmission alternatives such as storage to be recovered. So what could the future hold? Well, first, there's a potential for participation in RTO capacity markets. Capacity markets provide revenue certainty for resources that clear in annual auctions. In New York, for example, resources are bought on a one-year look-ahead. In New England, there's a one-year capacity market delivered for 3 years out. But often, the value of many storage applications isn't in the megawatt volume of capacity of the particular facility, but in its speed and flexibility. Forward capacity markets aren't designed to compensate for that value. Instead, are largely focused on acquiring the necessary volume of capacity to meet reserves. So how about forward capacity markets for ancillary services? This could be a blend of the performance-based payment concepts in Order 755 and the forward contracting mechanisms in the capacity market. We've done some thinking on forward ancillary services market, what it might look like, but we haven't identified a need to move forward on the idea from a regulatory perspective yet. We don't have a record of an existing RTO capacity market where it would be unjust and unreasonable without forward procurement of ancillary services capacity. And also, not all RTOs have capacity markets, so any expansion to include ancillary services will only be relevant for some markets. Some RTOs are considering how their capacity markets might evolve to address future ancillary services needs, particularly as to the need for flexibility is increasing. We're following the developments and looking forward to those proposals. Finally, we wonder if it would be possible to design a cost of service rate mechanism that blends market-based rate opportunities. This would allow a project to include a rate base such as a transmission function proposed by Western Grid, while also allowing the project to bid into energy or ancillary services market when not needed to support transmission service. But as I mentioned before, we haven't exactly figured out how that would work yet. It's a sort of, future regulation that we're looking at. So we still recognize there's a lot of work to be done. I've been addressing these energy storage issues and try to address them as effectively and efficiently as possible. But I encourage all of you to bring forward your ideas. The ISO, certainly we get ideas from the ISOs and RTOs around the country as well. And together I think we can formulate good policies and make good business cases for storage to be an integral part of our markets. Thank you.
I actually have a quick follow-up, Chairman. In reading Order 755 and hearing your remarks just now, you mentioned that faster responding resources like storage were being asked to do more work in the capacity markets. And it's a bit of a technical question, but I was curious, why is that exactly?
Well, they do more work in essence by being able to respond faster to the signal that the grid operator provides to them. In other words, by providing that faster response, they can catch the curve quicker and they can in essence slow down or dampen better the variations or variability in the overall operation of the system. So they work harder, but under 755 they get paid more as well. That's the good part. They get paid for the actual work they do, and that was the main essence of 755. It gave them the compensation for the actual value that something like storage could bring, fast response storage could bring to the market.
Thank you. And to Ms. Edson, again, we're talking about kind of, since each agency has a distinct, although related, function to play in bringing this flexible resource online, asking each speaker to address in what way does your agency touch on storage, and what are you doing within your agency to help implement it?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the joint venture for including the ISO in this panel today. Our CEO was here last year, could not make it this year, unfortunately, so you have me instead. I'm very happy to be here. What I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of the ISO for those of you that aren't familiar with it, then touch on our current activities, and then describe the challenge that we see that goes to the kind of foundation Chairman Wellinghoff just laid about the changing nature of load and the flexibility needs on the system. So the California ISO is a public benefit nonprofit corporation. We are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and we're responsible for reliable operation of a little more than 80% of the system here in California, with a small little piece of southwestern Nevada. We use software to redispatch our system every 5 minutes to optimize operations, taking into account market bids from generators and transmission congestion on the system. We use automatic generation control to match load and resources every 4 seconds. Our markets clear a little over $8 billion per year. In addition, we manage the interconnections to the high voltage transmission system and plan for its expansion based on reliability needs, policy objectives of the state, and economic benefits to ratepayers. Now with regard to storage and specific initiatives, we have a number of efforts underway and some ready for deployment in response to the leadership that FERC has provided. For example, we've deployed a non-generation model to allow resources to operate from positive to negative to positive, as storage can do. It's a model that wasn't otherwise considered in our systems that we now have in place and available. We're about to deploy our pay-for-performance model pursuant to Order 755, which will compensate resources with a regulation capacity payment plus a mileage payment for their response to dispatch instructions, including the accuracy of that response. We're in market simulation now, and deployment will occur over the next few months. We also have a flexible ramping constraint in our model today that ensures we have enough flexible resources available in the event of a significant unplanned loss or increase in wind or solar production. That constraint will be converted into from a market constraint to a system constraint to a full market product next year. So those are a number of things underway now to start to try to address this fragmented revenue stream issue that storage faces, which, as Chairman Wellinghoff has noted, is really one of the fundamental challenges this industry faces. We can consider storage options in our transmission planning process, but again, it's for the fixed rate cost recovery the combined transmission revenue possibility and market participation is very complicated and difficult and is still under review and consideration. So the next thing I just want to do very briefly is kind of outline for you the flexibility challenge that we face now in California. We've done considerable work and analysis on our system about how operational needs are changing, especially with the increased levels of wind and solar resources now coming online. As we look forward to 2020 and California's 33% renewable standard, which we fully support and are doing everything possible to enable, the net load that must be served with dispatchable resources begins to look very, very different. So what we see then as a result, think about it this way. It's easier to think about in terms of solar because it's a predictable pattern. So as the sun comes up, the net load we're serving comes down. We're now, and you start to see then, I'll go this way, the net load comes down with sunrise. So the dispatchable resources are not operating now midday, and net load comes up as solar drops off the system with sunset. And those dispatchable resources then must be available to meet that new peak. We see the challenge most dramatically in the spring for a variety of reasons, but we literally see the ramping requirements on our system to meet that evening peak in more than doubling from about 6,000 megawatts in a few hours to 14,000 megawatts in a few hours. So what this drives home to us is the essential need for flexible resources on the system and the need to design a mechanism to procure resources for providing that flexibility and for being available, remaining available during those hours they might not otherwise generate. So it really kind of turns things on its head when you think about it. So I spent years and been in this industry for a long time. We all thought that we want to be charging our cars, our electric cars at night. We may now want people to plug their cars in during the day. It's a little mind-bending. So we may be asking battery storage to charge during the day when that solar is available and discharge to meet that ramp. So it really does start to change how we think about it, and it's a very fundamental change that is challenging us, and I think challenging everyone in the industry to try to think through what these business models need to become in order to be successful. We are fully committed to making this work, and we're working across the organizations. We'll talk a little more about that later, I think. But it is a serious challenge, and we need your help to find the ways to create the appropriate revenue streams for you and make sure we have the services available to meet these very significantly changing system needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Peterman, what is the role of the CPUC in energy storage, and what is happening over there today?
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for the invitation to be here with you today. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Everyone should be smiling. We made it here, in the traffic, which I, having been previously lead on transportation at the Energy Commission, driving here made me really think we got to get better about public transportation here in the Valley. So as Brian noted, I've been at the Public Utilities Commission for a few months now, and prior to that, I was at the Energy Commission, where I was lead commissioner for renewables, transportation, and natural gas. And in that role, I increasingly saw the need to think about system balance and the opportunities, especially as we're trying to reach our climate change goals, to find low carbon alternatives to manage some of our renewables integration, and also the possibility and potential for electric vehicles to help serve that need. I also serve as the chair of the Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative for the state, and through that work have had more exposure in thinking about opportunities for vehicle-to-grid and battery operations. So at the Public Utilities Commission, I was excited to be assigned the storage proceeding. And as the newly assigned commissioner to that proceeding, I'm working on implementing AB 2514, which, thanks to Assembly member Nancy Skinner, who will be speaking later, was passed in 2009. And AB 2514 requires the Public Utilities Commission to determine appropriate targets, if any, for each load-serving entity to procure viable and cost-effective energy storage systems to be achieved by December 2015 and December 2020. Many of you are active in that proceeding, so if I get something wrong, I'm sure you will correct me. The proceeding also allows us to consider a variety of possible policies to encourage the cost-effective deployment of energy storage. To think about how, or to understand how the Public Utilities Commission is implementing 2514, it is important to understand the overall political context in which we're doing this work. And Karen touched on it a bit, but we have a couple of key policies here in the state. One is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which was implemented initially in 2002, and it's been upped twice. We now have a target of 33% renewables by 2020, and as Karen noted, as we've been successful, very successful, with reaching that goal, and now we're starting to see some potential challenges for the system. And then the other policy to be aware of and mindful of is AB 32, which is our greenhouse gas reduction policy. AB 32 requires the state to reduce its greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by 2020, and then by 80% in 2050. Both of these mandates have created new realities within our electric system that storage may be able to respond to. Acknowledging this, AB 2514 specifically calls for energy storage systems that have attributes to help with greenhouse gas reduction as well as renewables integration. And I'm currently working on a plan to propose to my colleagues for storage that would focus on these two benefits.
And that's actually a very nice transition into my next question. So I'm glad that the order that we took this worked out. Because I wanted to speak a little bit more about those benefits. And as the agency that is looking at these questions, Commissioner Peterman, I wondered if you would be able to give us an update. The vision with energy storage was at this kind of conceptual level that it can meet a number of different system needs that are increasingly important today in light of the policies that you just outlined. But I'm wondering if you can give us an update about, more specifically, what have we learned as the proceeding has kind of unfolded, and is that knowledge really kind of evolving, and if so, how?
Sure. I think the knowledge is evolving. I think what we've grown to appreciate is that there are a variety of storage options out there, and the California Energy Commission, through its research program, has done a tremendous amount of work already in this area to look at different uses and applications for storage. But as a part of our proceeding at the PUC, we've developed a set of 7 use cases falling into broad categories of transmission connected storage, which my colleagues here have talked about, distribution level storage, and demand side or customer side applications. And these use cases are linked again to the CPUC policy priorities, and specifically what I see as some of the benefits of storage, specifically renewables energy integration, load service reliability, local service reliability, peak reduction, and demand side management. Our understanding of the cost effectiveness of storage is evolving, and we've had some recent results in this area, so I want to share those with you. We've applied 2 cost effectiveness models to our use cases, and the initial results were presented at a workshop on March 25th, 2013, and this work is done by consultants EPRI and E3 and KEMA. And these results are encouraging. One model examined basic feasibility of 3 use cases: transmission bulk storage, storage providing frequency regulation services, and distribution storage sited at a utility substation. Modeling results showed that, subject to the baked-in assumptions, in most of the cases considered, like all these caveats, a storage system of one of the above types installed in 2020 is likely to have revenue in excess of earnings over 20 years of the project life. And so, looking at a couple cases, I think the key takeaway is that there is some cost-effective storage out there, even under some circumstances where you may not have the full ancillary services markets that some have envisioned. The challenge, though, so I'll tell you, the next step on our cost-effectiveness first is that we're going to solicit comments by parties. on the cost effectiveness results. But there's a challenge with looking at cost and benefits still now, in that we really don't have much on the ground operational and cost data available. The Energy Commission, through its research program, and with work with utilities, have funded a number of storage projects, but many of these won't be online till 2014, 2015. And so these models, these cost-effectiveness models, do require a number of assumptions. But still, I believe we need to move forward, and we'll continue to incorporate the data that we're getting to help us refine our analysis, and as well as refine where we want to go in terms of, if at all, procurement targets.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on that. What were the 3 use cases that were analyzed for cost effectiveness again?
So, let's see. Well, we had a couple models, and I'm going to look at my staff here to say, but the one model that I was referring to was a use case for, let's see, give me a second.
Sure.
Many a paper, just not the one I need. It's page number 4, which seems to be the only one not showing up. Okay, here we go. So it's transmission bulk storage system, storage providing frequency regulation services, and distribution storage sited at a utility substation. But these are 3 use cases, and we had 7, and you can find there's a document our staff put out, interim report in January, which details all the cases. But it gets the transmission side, to deal with some grid reliability, distribution, storage, which has the opportunity to actually really help at a distribution substation and providing support there. And then customer side, and thinking about that perhaps coupled with some of the distributed renewable generation that we've been encouraging.
And the initial results were that those do provide cost-effective solutions over a 20-year kind of time horizon. Is that the gist?
In some cases, yes. I say that's the gist. I mean, with some of these, it's what you're comparing it to as well. So, for example, if you're looking, in some cases, you're comparing it to what a new peaker will be. And some of the challenges are that we don't know really what a new peaker will cost. We know what they're being bid in for, but we don't know actually what they're going to cost in the end. But, you know, I was talking with the staff yesterday about some of these results. And what I appreciate about the analysis that's being conducted is that there's some fairly, I would say fairly conservative assumptions in here. Conservative assumptions about declines in technology learning within storage, for example, about the availability of ancillary markets. And so in a number of cases, there are some opportunities for cost-effective storage. And so I think we need to look for those opportunities and continue to identify other market barriers, however. But this is looking at, from a developer's perspective, from storage, if you're building storage, starting in 2020, 20 years forward, starting in 2020, for 20 years, the revenue will exceed the cost. Hope that just did not confuse anyone anymore, but.
No, that sounds very encouraging.
I was encouraged to hear these results. You know, you do this analysis and you hire consultants and you think, come back with something that tells me we've got a chance. And I'm here to tell you, I think we have a chance.
I'm sure that's very welcome news to the audience. And given that there is so much work to be done still to create, align the incentives with the service, I think it's very encouraging to hear that the early results are positive. Commissioner Peterman, you mentioned grid reliability as one of the benefits that storage can help to provide, which is an increasingly important issue in light of the policy changes that you've outlined, in particular, integration of large-scale variable energy resources. As I hope this discussion sort of demonstrates, getting that done, creating the incentives to enable grid reliability in this more challenging environment really requires the coordinated activity of all the agencies that have a role to play. And we have 2 here in California that have a particularly important role, and that is the CPUC and the California ISO. So turning to that question of coordination, I wanted to ask Ms. Edson and Commissioner Peterman whether you could address the ways in which your agencies are working together to coordinate your agendas in order to bring this resource into fruition? And what, if anything, could we do better if there is any?
Thank you, Brian, and of course we can always do things better. Let me, though, say that the good news is that I think the ISO, the CPUC, and the other state agencies are all committed to the same outcome, and that is reliable operations and effective and a large deployment of non-generation alternatives to conventional generation technologies. We know that's really an essential part of our goals for meeting California greenhouse gas reduction targets, and has to be an essential part of how we think about these matters going forward. There are a number of things underway that we are doing jointly to that end. One is the ISO is working to do a better job of defining the operational needs we have on the system and provide that to the California Public Utilities Commission to inform their thinking and regulatory approach to procurement. Because at this point in time, capacity is procured by the Public Utilities Commission through the investor-owned utilities, largely, meeting most of the needs of California. Now, we do have a number of non-jurisdictional entities also in our market that the PUC doesn't touch, but in some ways they have a free ride on some of that procurement that happens today. But that is work that we are doing to give better definition. That's also something that will importantly inform work on the demand response side. Commissioner Peterman talked about demand storage as a demand side management. Demand response is also a demand side management. The California ISO is working to develop a roadmap for demand response that will address a number of issues that are relevant to the storage community as well. And we are hosting a forum in May in cooperation with the PUC and the CEC and demand response providers that may be of interest to you, where we really want to hear from parties about what's necessary to make this work. We also are involved in a number of pilot projects in California. The PG&E back at Dixon project, for example, is one we're working on, where there will be data coming in, and of course that will all be shared under NDAs as necessary with the Public Utilities Commission and others. So that work is also underway. We also have a vehicle-to-grid pilot with the Air Force in the Los Angeles area, where they want to engage directly in the wholesale markets from behind the meter with the battery capability they have on the electric vehicle side. So that will also be a way that we'll start to be able to test some of these mechanisms and the revenue streams that they can create. More generally, we are also exploring how direct participation, the tariffs, interconnection rules need to be changed to accommodate the greater deployment of energy storage technology. One area where we continue to have a bit of a challenge in coming together in alignment, I think, is with regard to capacity market. One thing that I know Chairman Wellinghoff is well aware of is we, having just left a meeting in Boise, Idaho about an energy imbalance market. For those of you that don't know, the 5-minute redispatch system is really an imbalance market, and we have made an offer to provide that market elsewhere in the West under a very competitive proposal. Low-cost entry, low-cost ongoing operations, free exit. But we still find that FERC jurisdiction over that market is an impediment, and we're facing the need to really address in tangible, meaningful ways that issue in order to attract non-jurisdictional entities into this mechanism, one that provides tremendous economic benefit to them and to California, and provides a tremendous benefit in the form of better efficient use of the transmission system and better renewable integration. With regard to the issues here, the California ISO has been working with the utilities and others to design a 3 to 5 year forward capacity market that will procure flexibility. Now, this goes to the issue that Chairman Wellinghoff has indicated is a challenge. This flexible procurement really hasn't happened before. It's a new way of thinking about what we're procuring and how we get it and how much we need. We think that's an important mechanism to have in place, so those resources like storage, like conventional generators, like demand response that aren't needed in the middle of the day can be available to meet those needs at other times on the system. So we're advocates of a capacity payment mechanism that would provide that kind of payment stream to storage and demand response and the conventional generators that are also necessary, peaking generators for meeting these system needs. We're told, though, that the Public Utilities Commission is very concerned about the jurisdictional issues here. We're hoping that we can work through those with them, provide mechanisms to give them confidence that that's not what this is about. It's not about jurisdiction, it's about making sure we meet the needs. It's also, though, going to be an important mechanism in our mind to deal with the proper cost allocation to entities that aren't jurisdictional in the PUC, so there is appropriate cost allocation. It also is a way to do it optimizes across the entire footprint as well. And it also will allow annual true-ups in a way that further optimizes and allows for adjustments as demands change on the system. So that's a very important initiative and requires considerable more work to overcome, I think, the issues that I identified. The last thing I want to note, which I think is a very important initiative as well, that demonstrates the kind of collaboration that's underway, has to do with all of those assumptions that go into our transmission planning, our modeling of the system, the Public Utilities Commission procurement decisions. It goes to really the extent to which available demand response, energy efficiency, and other things are taken into account in establishing the targets that we're going after. So the three entities, the Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, and the California ISO, are working now through the details of a high-level agreement we've reached to make sure that we have a mechanism for aligning those planning assumptions, and that we do that in the context of the Energy Commission's Integrated Energy Planning Policy Report. Thank you. It's the report that produces their demand forecast. So we are having conversations now at the staff level across our organizations to make sure that we have a solid process for getting those assumptions aligned to the extent that we have disagreements in that process, a mechanism to escalate those disagreements to senior management and to the senior executive level, the president of the commission, the chair of the Energy Commission, and the CEO of the California ISO, so that we can make sure that we have that kind of alignment. I think that as well will, I hope, contribute to overcoming some of the difficulties and the jurisdictional concerns that we hear about. But we are definitely working together. We can do a lot better, and I'm optimistic that we'll find our path forward.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll note that AB 2514 specifically requires the CPUC to work with the ISO and to incorporate any ISO analysis on storage in our proceeding and in our decision making. And so it really identified up front the need for our agencies to coordinate. And as Karen noted, the Public Utilities Commission and the ISO and the Energy Commission have been coordinating to look at this question of how do we have the flexible resources that we'll need, particularly to integrate renewables. And we had a very productive meeting with about 450 people were there. It's about a couple months ago. It was an en banc looking at some of the various options. And when it comes to, I think one of the challenges facing us all is really identifying what is the need. And that need can vary, and we have various options for reducing the need for flexible resources. Everything from encouraging a diversified renewable portfolio. One of our challenges is that our portfolio is increasingly dominated with solar. Currently, wind has the largest share, but by 2020, you can expect solar PV to be about 33%. And when you have such a variable resource, it does create some challenges. We do have other renewables that we're pursuing, such as bioenergy, for example, and geothermal, and those are less intermittent and can help reduce some of that need. You can also reduce some of that need for flexibility, as Karen noted, with an energy imbalance market, with improved forecasting, with demand response. And so we're interested in all those options. Going forward, I think it's important as we're trying to figure out whatever the right mechanism we need to procure that capacity for the future, whether that be a capacity market or some other mechanism. It's important that California maintains its authority to implement programs that are in support of our sustainable energy goals. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity to continue to promote the preferred resources that we have found so important for our state. I think what's exciting for the first time for California is that we're not the first ones out on a topic. So we're not the first ones to consider a capacity market. And so we can look to the experience from the East, some of the lessons learned, and think about really what is the right approach for California. So again, we're continuing to coordinate, and as Karen noted, it's a tremendous step, this coordination we're going to have around some of the assumptions in modeling our need, assumptions around energy efficiency, assumptions around the availability of demand response. The more we can come and have some consensus around those issues, we'll be able to figure out what mechanisms, storage or natural gas facilities will be best to meet that need.
Thank you. That, again, was such a great transition. We're on the same page here. I really appreciate
Mind
that.
meld here, Brian. Yeah.
Because I wanted to actually ask that, the question. You mentioned that for once we're not the first ones out of the gate. And so I was going to turn back to Chairman Wellinghoff, who brings a national perspective, obviously, as Chairman of FERC, and ask you a little bit about your perspective on what you're seeing nationwide in the different regions, and what they're doing to bring storage onto the grid, which ones are furthest along, and what can we in California learn from their experience?
Well, as Carla mentioned, there are a number of other ISOs out there, RTOs, that do have capacity markets, and because of those capacity markets, they in essence have another product that's available to a provider of service. Usually those capacity markets, though, as I mentioned in my opening, are not something that are necessarily attractive to storage. But the markets that have been attracted to the storage resources in other regions have been the ancillary services market. And under the 755 order that I mentioned, that fast response service that can be provided has attracted a number of battery and flywheel manufacturers in areas of New York and New England that have put in substantial resources to take advantage of those higher prices that can be received through the Order 755 ancillary service market. In addition, there's areas that are looking at like Karen mentioned, that the DOD is going to do here in California, have actually demonstrated in other markets the ability to do vehicle to grid, and I think this is one of the real emerging areas of the utilization of batteries, of using batteries for dual or multiple purposes on the grid and off the grid, and referring specifically to batteries in vehicles where they are used for their primary purpose of providing transportation services, but can be used at the same time that they're charging for the provision of ancillary services. And this was demonstrated first in PJM, the Mid-Atlantic ISO. And in PJM, they had a demonstration at the University of Delaware where there were 7 electric vehicles that were connected to the grid and at night to charge. And during the charging period, they were receiving a regulation signal from PJM. And as they received that regulation signal, those batteries would respond to it and provide a regulation service, reg up or reg down, depending upon the signal, and do that at the same time they were actually charging the battery. So there was no diminution of the ability for the battery to be charged, but there was an ability to provide a regulation service to the grid simultaneously to that charging function. So the ultimate result was the car was getting charged, but it also was getting paid for providing regulation services. So those cars got paid somewhere between $7 and $10 per day per car to provide that regulation service to PJM grid, which in essence was more than the cost of them charging the car. They were in essence charging the car for free. So these kinds of dual services are things that we need to explore more. Again, that was on a demonstration basis, but now PJM has lowered their regulation service minimum amount to 100 kilowatts, so you can aggregate 100 kilowatts worth of electric vehicles in essence, and provide that in to PGM as a regulation service and provide a revenue stream that in essence can pay for those batteries in that car that oftentimes are more expensive than the internal combustion engine alternatives. So I think there's some very interesting things going on because we've been able to put in place some of these market rules that allow for the recognition of the unique characteristics of these kinds of assets.
And just to follow up, the threshold for participation was 100 kilowatts?
That's correct, 100 kilowatts.
What type of entity would be able to aggregate electric vehicles at that scale? What are we talking about?
Well, 100 kilowatts, let's see, I think a Tesla's got about 56 kilowatts in it, so you only need a couple of Teslas to aggregate together. I think a Leaf, I think a Leaf is like 18 kilowatt hours. Ultimately, you don't need many vehicles, but certainly any fleet entities, anybody who had a fleet of vehicles could do it. And it wouldn't be restricted to automobiles either. It could be forklifts in a warehousing facility. It could be golf carts at a golfing facility. I mean, anything that has batteries in it that charges overnight. Ultimately, if it has the proper communications devices in them that, again, were developed at the University of Delaware, and that I know that are now licensing to private company, it ultimately could be aggregated and provided to PGM.
I want to comment on that. Also comment on the electrical vehicle front. In addition to doing vehicle to grid while you're owning the car, we've approved for a couple of our utilities to do demonstration projects with batteries as a second life application. And so your battery in your electric vehicle degrades over time, and it can degrade to a point where it's not successful for an EV, but it could very well, you could aggregate a number of batteries and use them for something like distribution level storage. And so the utilities will be looking at various ways to do this, including how to outreach to customers to get their interest. But the challenge we're facing on the electric vehicle side is that even though costs have come down tremendously for the cars, they're still more expensive than traditional vehicles. So this can be a win-win because they can provide a different monetary stream for electric vehicle producers as well as provide grid reliability for the utilities. So it's an area that I'm excited about because I also have electric vehicle proceeding, and so I'm looking at the connections between both of these.
Is anyone from Tesla here? Because I know that Tesla actually has a business model for taking the batteries from their cars and doing exactly that. They didn't want to tell the ISO about that. It had to do with going off the grid, but they did confess to us when they...
You're doing it sometimes combined with solars. That's a double whammy from the ISO perspective.
That's exactly right. But let me just mention one other thing, and it goes to this flexibility issue and flexibility reserves. Because we now are thinking about our reserve requirements, not just in terms of a capacity reserve, but in terms of a flexibility reserve. And it's not a formal requirement now, but we have it and we look at it and we enforce it. It's where we identify a number of the benefits, for example, in an energy imbalance market. It's having that flexibility capability expanded across a bigger footprint and across where you get the time differentiated benefits as well. So the system is changing again.
Well, we are winding down, and we'll open it up to questions in just a moment. So if you've got those, we'll turn to you in a moment. The last question I'll just ask is a toss-up question that I'll throw out. This is which is going to achieve scale quicker? Behind-the-meter energy storage, utility-side energy storage, or something different?
Well, I'll take this one and say I hope whatever we need most. And because of that, there are these different applications for storage. And as I've been thinking through the proposal that I want to put forward to the other commissioners on storage, I envision doing a proposal where we have procurement megawatt targets for different use cases and some type of regular procurement, and having flexible procurement so that there are some off-ramps for cost and reasonableness. But as I noted earlier, there are a number of different applications. And so we still are getting on-the-ground experience with these projects. And so I think it's unlikely, for example, that storage will reach its full potential without some type of procurement encouragement. And it's a little early, I think, to pick winners, if you will. Again, there are a tremendous number of applications, and we're going to need to establish a real base on all of them as we move forward. So I'll say stay tuned for something to come out of my office. Please don't pester my staff or the PUC staff for any more details on this proposal. When it comes out, there will be significant and ample time for your input. I'm planning to have an all-party meeting with everyone in the storage proceeding because I haven't had a chance to meet with you individually yet, but that's the direction I'd like to go.
And I'll say from FERC's perspective, we want the market to pick the winners, and so I can't tell you between the two, although what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a huge ramp up of distributed generation, especially distributed solar. So you would think that logically distributed storage would follow. But again, I think it's going to be a market decision.
Look to follow the needs of the system, as you've all spoken to. Well, with that, we'll wrap up. Please help me, join me in thanking all of our panelists. And we have about 10 minutes for audience questions. Do we have microphones? Or yes, we do. Okay, so yes, sir, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for this. My name is William Todorov. We're a startup manufacturer of non-toxic, non-thermal runaway saline batteries. And I have a question about recycling the batteries for use charging the utility. If it's no longer valuable in the car because you put 100 watts in, you only get 40 out, what's the value of that in terms of the chemical loss in using it for recycling? If you're putting 100 watts in and only getting 40 out, it seems like you'd be better off recycling the battery.
I'm not a scientist, sir. Maybe you can help me answer that question. It's a good point to be raised, and that's what we want to consider. What are the alternatives? What's the counterfactual if we weren't going to be using it, for example, for grid reliability? But your point's well taken.
Hi, Judith Schwartz from To The Point. One of the challenges that technology companies have in this space is that because all 50 states have different rules, it becomes very challenging to design products that can be used nationally. Does storage present an unusual opportunity to have the state commissions work with FERC to be able to come up with something, whether it's standards or sharing information in some way or doing common rules, so that there actually is an economic viability for somebody to come up with good solutions because they won't need 50 different ones?
Well, we certainly attempt to work with state commissions as much as possible, certainly when they're working with their stakeholders within a RTO to formulate different concepts and different market rules, and try to work with them as much as possible in that regard. I don't know about standards. I think that's probably in Pat Hoffman's purview over DOE, so I'll stay out of the standards area.
It's always helpful to have some common understanding of attributes, but I'll say I don't think the challenge from a technology perspective nationwide is the lack of standards. I think it's a range in need for storage at this point in time. I was on a panel with some commissioners from other states about a year and a half ago, and California at the time was the only one that had a law to look at storage, and even our law is looking at cost-effective storage, and so and other states weren't even thinking about that. So partly this is encouraged by our renewables development, and so I think you can look to other states that have renewables. They'll be facing some of these challenges down the line, but for states that don't, I still think storage is probably too expensive for them to be thinking about seriously.
Arthur Hallenstock, Perkins Coie. There seems to me to be a race between market needs and market rules. We've got the advent of what I think of as the ducks of spring. The ISO refers to the duck curve. It's the curve that Karen Edson talked about, where you've got these tremendous ramps down and tremendous ramps up that mostly occur in the spring. We have tremendous need for flexible capacity on the system. And the question is whether we're going to be able to have the market rules that are being developed at FERC and at the PUC, to some degree through the ISO's proceedings, that will support storage being a solution to the ducts? Or are we going to end up needing that flexibility so quickly that we're going to only see conventional resources as the primary answer to that?
Well, let me just offer a few comments. The flexibility requirements, so that in terms of the needs on the system, a significant contributor to those needs is compliance with California's once-through cooling policy. That's a policy that applies to about 12,000 megawatts of generation located along the California coast, including the state's 2 nuclear plants. It's in the north, most of the compliance is solved, but in the south, very little of it is solved. And so if those compliance deadlines remain in effect, they hit in 2018 and 2020, we will lose in the LA basin about 6,700 megawatts of installed capacity. The LA basin alone doesn't count Big Creek, Ventura, or San Diego. So with that loss of capacity, it's kind of a twofer, really. You have to run the existing generation that's flexible harder to meet overall demand, and guess what? It's not available for flexibility. So there is, I think, a need to think through the timing of these things so that we can have the tools in place and not become a victim of just a victim of the timing of the needs. Having said that, the challenge we face, frankly, there's an easy solution to these flexibility needs, right? I mean, I don't want to say it, but I will. It's curtailing the renewables. Now, that's the last thing we want to do. That the ISO, we're absolutely committed to making sure that we're doing everything possible to allow compliance with adopted state policies, including the once-through cooling policy, including the RPS policy. So the recommendations that we put forward are ones that are carefully designed to accomplish all of those policies at the same time. But if we don't have the resources on the system, that alternative is there. I mean, we will maintain reliability, I guess that's the bottom line, and something I think is important to convey. The lights aren't going to go out, but we may have some very unhappy consequences if we don't go about this in an orderly way.
And just to add to that what Karen said, I think we are somewhat ahead of the curve on the rules out there with respect to storage with 755. I think that was a very forward-looking and innovative rule. And in addition, you have to remember that we don't have to do everything through rules, just like we did Western Grid. We can do them on case-by-case basis if necessary. So if California has a specific case, a specific issue, or the Cal ISO needs to do something, they can bring that case to us, make the case, present the evidence, and we can do it on an individual case basis. It doesn't have to be necessarily a generic rule. So there's multiple ways to approach it, and if there's region-specific problems, we're very sensitive to those region-specific problems, and we're very willing to try to work with the region, both the ISO and the state commissions, and try to do what we can to put in place as quickly as we can. It needs to be done to meet the reliability needs.
I'll also just add, the challenge we're facing will likely be more of a cost issue first before a reliability issue. And so when I talked about distribution level storage, the opportunity for that just provides an opportunity to delay some of the substation upgrade costs, for example. So to your point, Arthur, I think that there are, for some types of storage or some types of flexibility issues, we may have an immediate need to deal with them with a natural gas plant, but there are other applications where there could be some benefit now, and we're talking about smaller scale systems, a couple of megawatts versus the larger ones.
Hi. Okay, go ahead. We have time for just one quick one.
Those of you that I know. I want to understand a little bit more about the imbalance market that you were talking about, Karen. And because it seems like that would have a huge potential. But we've got, 35 or 36 balancing authorities just in the West. And are they really effectively gatekeepers on the offering of imbalanced services between them? And why wouldn't FERC have jurisdiction to remove those seemingly discriminatory barriers if the potential is that large, including storage?
Well, I'll talk about part of this. We do have 37 balancing authorities in the West. California serves about 30% of the load. BPA serves another huge chunk. Pacific Corp is the company that's agreed to participate in the California ISO's energy imbalance market. You take those 3 off the top, you're left with 34 balancing authorities dividing a very small amount of load. You take LA and SMUD out and you're even down to itsy bitsy pieces. And it is a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of their willingness to the jurisdictional issue that I mentioned. I think there's a certain reluctance, a sense of giving up control. The energy imbalance market we're offering is our current 5-minute redispatch market. So if those of you that know our markets, you know how it works. We're starting a stakeholder process. In fact, the first meeting in that process is today in Folsom. And we've laid out the straw proposal for market design, and we've identified a number of other policy issues. As for the FERC's authority in this regard, in terms of the number of balancing authorities, I defer that to the chairman. It's a tough, difficult issue. Contributes, I think, to certain reliability issues. The compliance now with reliability standards, I think, is starting to drive a certain consolidation, but it's slow moving.
And Joshua, as you know, the FERC's policy has been in the past with respect to individual balancing authorities and the transmission owners in those balancing authorities to allow them to voluntarily decide whether or not they want to join a larger organization, whether or not they want to give over some level of authority of their transmission, although with this EIM process, it's not necessary to do that, but at least to, in essence, collaborate with the ISO in this way to set up this market. FERC policy historically has been to allow them to decide that on their own voluntarily. Doesn't mean that we may not have the authority to force them to do that, although one of my predecessors, 2 chairmen back, did something called SMD, and he wasn't there very long, so standard market design. So again, I think it's the best approach is the carrot and not the stick. We're trying to show the balancing authorities in the West what are the costs and benefits, and there's a lot of discussion and a lot of analysis going on determining these costs and benefits for them. And to Pacific Corp's credit and to Mid-America's credit, who owns Pacific Corp, they understand it's a business proposition. It makes sense to them. They're going to save anywhere from $30 to $100 some odd million a year by allowing the ISO to operate this energy imbalance market for them, and it's a good deal. But hopefully the rest of the balancing authorities in the West will see it similarly, that it'll be a good deal for them.
And with that, we're going to have to wrap up here. Please join me again in thanking our panel.